The topic. Hi, Jason. We're very happy to have you here. I think Jason has been here every year with us at Devopsdays Amsterdam. So glad to have you back again.
Thanks. It's an honor to be back again. And yeah, I think you can all hear me. Hopefully my audio is working. Yeah, so a little bit short on time, I guess, from running over, but let's talk about a few things. So the adjacent possible, but I first wanted to share about the 4 cornerstones of resilience. And this comes from Eric Holnagel. He wrote the book Resilience Engineering. So the 4 cornerstones is essentially, what does an organization need to be resilient? And so the first is monitoring, right? This is knowing what to look for. For example, time, if you're running over or running behind on a talk. But this is easy. We have tools for monitoring, right? We all have monitoring tools. The second cornerstone is responding. It's knowing what to do. And again, we've got plenty of resources on this. PagerDuty has a great guide on incident response. We've all practiced incident response. So I feel like we've got this covered. Learning is the third cornerstone. How do we learn? And this is why we talk about things like blameless postmortems. How do we learn from failures? The fourth cornerstone, and probably the hardest, I think, is the anticipating, knowing what to expect. And this kind of leads in from those blameless postmortems, how we learn about failures, but failures rarely occur in the same way. And so we have a difficult time knowing what to look for. And this is obvious, right? This at least was me going into incident reviews. You think, oh, the outage was caused by an edge case that there's no way we could have predicted or accounted for, right? And then you go into the postmortem and you do it, and you come out and you're thinking, well, of course it failed. I'm surprised that it worked at all. It was just bound to fail when I looked at what happened. So maybe you're not alone. But as Sheila mentioned, I'm Jason. I do a bunch of things. The important part of this slide is if you've got questions for me later, I'll be in the chat, or feel free to email me. I'm je@gremlin.com. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/reliability-engineering, where I'm starting to post videos about SRE and DevOps topics. So what does this have to do with anything, the adjacent possible? Let's talk a little bit about that. The adjacent possible is a term that comes from biology. Biologist Stuart Kauffman created this term to describe evolution. And the gist of his theory is that evolution builds upon itself. For example, a fish cannot directly evolve into a land animal like a lizard. That's impossible. There's a sequence of small changes that are required, and each of these small changes unlocks subsequent small changes. For example, the fish needs fins that have bones in it. And then eventually one of those bones needs to evolve to be more dominant. And then that bone grows longer. And over time, it evolves to have a joint in the middle, an elbow. And it's impossible for a fish to get an elbow if it doesn't first have that longer bone, that sort of proto-limb. And in hindsight, we can see the entire chain, but moving forward through it unfolds. And each step is only possible after the previous evolution. And so in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, Stephen Johnson applies this to innovation, that just like the evolution of the fish to a land animal, you can't immediately jump from the invention of the light bulb to lasers. The invention of the light bulb creates a platform where innovative people could begin to imagine what was next, the things that they couldn't have ever imagined if they only had fire or candles. And so he describes it this way. If you think of it as a house that magically expands with each door you open, you begin in a room with 4 doors, and each door leads to a new room that you haven't visited yet. Once you open one of those doors and step into that room, 3 new doors appear, each leading to a brand new room that you couldn't have reached from your original starting point. If you keep opening new doors, eventually you'll have built a palace. So when I first started reading about all this, because I'm really obsessed with innovation recently and reading a lot of books about it, my mind started thinking about how we think and talk about incidents. Because we often say that in complex systems, there's no root cause. There's only contributing factors. That one factor allows for another thing to happen, and as it develops and combines with additional factors, it leads to our major incidents. And so if failure has contributing factors, then maybe, or at least I think, there's an adjacent possible of failure. And what I mean by that is that in our current understandings of our systems, you can imagine possible failures, but it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to imagine the catastrophes that these possible failures could lead to or contribute to. Or back to Eric Holnagel's 4 cornerstones, we can't anticipate these catastrophes, and that makes resilience very difficult. So this kind of leads into the categories of known and unknown and knowledge. And so we often talk about known knowns, the things that we know, and known unknowns, the things that we know we are ignorant of. For example, I know that there are nuclear submarines. I know that they exist, but I also know that I'm completely ignorant in how to drive or operate a nuclear submarine. And then there's the unknown unknowns, the things that are so foreign to me that I don't even know that I don't know about them. And if we put this into Johnson's analogy of the rooms, then the known known is the room that I'm in. The known unknown is the adjacent room, the room that I can imagine, and I just need to open the door to that. But the rooms that are beyond are the unknown unknowns, the rooms that I have no concept of. And so this makes you question then, how do you explore those adjacent possibilities? How can we innovate on failure to move into those adjacent rooms? And in doing so, be able to start imagining the rooms beyond and improve our ability to anticipate failures and thereby improve our ability to respond to them or build more resilient systems. So I think that our known knowns are our non-incidents, right? They're the things we know about. We know that our systems can fail in certain ways, and so we build or we design for reliability. We build auto systems, automatic systems, auto scaling. We use Kubernetes, things like that. The known unknowns are the things that I would call them our minor incidents, right? We have monitoring and observability because we know that our systems can run out of disk space and that'll cause a failure. But we don't know exactly what will contribute to that. So we monitor for our disk space, our CPU. We create response plans to anticipate what we might do if these happen. But that means that our unknown unknowns are our major incidents, and we don't have anything for them. We have hope, and hope is not a strategy, as you've heard. So if we're currently here in our known knowns, how do we move into our known unknowns? How do we start to move into those adjacent rooms? And this is where I think chaos engineering is a great tool. Chaos engineering allows us to now start to exercise and move into these known unknowns, to recreate these failures that we sort of can predict or sort of can think about and imagine. And the great thing, though, is that when we do that, we're essentially expanding our knowledge. And those known unknowns now become known knowns. And that allows us to imagine what's beyond. And those unknown unknowns now become known unknowns. And we could start to think about how you monitor for those, how you create response plans for those. So if you're not familiar with chaos engineering, here's my definition, and there are a lot of them. But as I've practiced chaos engineering over time, I think of it as thoughtful planned experiments that are designed to improve our understanding of how systems work and how they fail so that we can improve them, right? Because our systems are only as good as we are as engineers. So the better that we are, the more that we know, the better our systems can be. I really think of it as a scientific process, right? And the scientific process has 5 steps. Number 1, you observe the system. And we do this every day. How does it normally look? How do we normally see it? The second step is to create a hypothesis. How do I think that my system will react to failure? The third step then is to inject that failure. That's quite simple. And then we analyze it. how did it actually react? But more importantly, as we think about the adjacent possible or the new adjacent possibilities, what else could happen, right? If my system, if I inject some failure and it stays up and it works perfectly fine, I can ask myself, but what else could come along? And the last step, the most important step though, is to share your knowledge and repeat, right? To keep building on this. So what's next? I'd love to chat with you more about this, and I'll be hanging out in the lounge at a table. I'm not sure which, because it's quite a large lounge there. But what's next, I think, is to explore the adjacent possible, for you to start moving into failure with some chaos engineering, imagining what's next, and then using that to build more reliable systems. My email's up there, so is my YouTube channel. Go check it out. Hit me up later or chat with me or send me an email.